Good day. Welcome to this lecture video on research methodology. I am teacher Melay. So today we will be discussing what are the essential parts of research methodology, and also, of course, we are also going to give a background of each of the sections of research methodology. So we have the following sections: the research design, research locale, research participants, research instruments, data gathering procedure, and the treatment of the data. So these are, of course, the plan that you have to do with regards to your research study. So you have, of course, to determine what is the design of your study, where will be it conducted, who will be the participant, how will you gather the data or answer the problem. So which means what instruments will you use? Are you going to give tests? Are you going to use guide questions? Are you going to use survey instruments and others? And of course, you also need to give a detailed information on how you will gather your data step by step, and how will you treat your data. So we have the section for the treatment of the data. So let's start now. So let's start with, of course, the research design. So what do you need to do about the design of your study? So how will you classify your research design? So actually, research design serves as the blueprint for research, or it's a plan. So it can, some of the common design involves, it depends on the nature of your study, whether it is a quantitative, qualitative, is it a mixed method, is it experimental and non-experimental. So for quantitative design, so if you have a set of problems, and in your problem, you have a descriptive problems and inferential problem, you can classify what type of design based on your problem. So if your problem is descriptive, so the term, of course, is it can be that it is a descriptive design, or if it is it contains a problem that aims to compare two groups, three groups or more, or if you have problems that ask for significant difference. So you can also classify the design as comparative design. So if you have problems that involves both descriptive and comparative, then you can term it as descriptive comparative design. So for correlation, if you have inferential problems that aims to determine for correlation, significant correlations of your variables, then the classification of the design of your study is also a correlational. So if you have also a problem that aims to predict, so it is or to determine significant influence, then it is also classified as predictive. Or generally, if you want to know the the possible factors that influence, then it is also exploratory. So here are the common quantitative design based on your research problem. So if your problem now, or your problems contains all problems that involve description, comparison, correlation, predictive, and exploratory, so you of course need to name all of this in your research design. So it depends on your research problems. And then next, we actually have also problems or designs that has something to do whether it is experimental or non-experimental design. So for experimental design, we have the following common experimental design. So we have the pre-experimental or crude pre-experimental, mainly because you will just focus on one group and there is no comparison group or there's no control group. While if we have both what do you call this, the treatment group and control group, because that are the groups that are very important in conducting experimental designs, then it can be a quasi-experimental design or true experimental design, which depends now on how you select your data. Is it by randomization? Did you use random sampling and all other stuff? While if it is quasi-experimental, it means that you did not use a randomizations in selection. So it actually differs on how you are going to select later your respondents, or rather the subjects of this study. So as mentioned, these are the main experimental designs. We have the quasi-experimental designs and the true experimental design. But it doesn't mean that it ends there, because we still have some classifications of quasi-experimental and also some classifications of experimental designs under true experimental designs, which again has something to do with the setup of your study, whether you're going to give pre-test, post-test, or you will just give post-test only. So all of those types of experimental designs can be, of course, explained, which depends on the nature on how you're going to conduct this study. And we also have here other types of designs, which is also classified based on the duration of the conduct. So if it is just a short period and it usually uses survey techniques, it is cross-sectional design. So in our discussion of the classification of design based on the problem, so you can actually state that it is a cross-sectional design because it is conducted within a short period of time, and then you use survey questionnaire. But then you have some problems that involves both descriptive and inferential. So it does not mean that you will just limit your design into cross-sectional design or just state it as descriptive or inferential design. So it really depends now on what will be the research problems, what will be the setup of your study. Because as you can see here in our discussion, we have a lot of design. So it is just based on how you will later conduct your study, what will be the setup of your study. So for cross-sectional design, as mentioned, so this is conducted in a short period of time, and it is we usually use survey techniques in doing this type of studies. While for longitudinal research design, so what do you call this? In contrary to cross-sectional design, we are going, of course, to lengthen the period. So it involves a longer period than cross-sectional design. That's why it's called longitudinal research design. So it measures, this is when you want to measure some change. So you can do this over a period of time. And we have two types of design under longitudinal research design. We have what we call as the time series design and the panel design. So for time series design, same variable at a regular intervals. While if you want to also measure some changes at individual level, then you're going to use the panel design. So if you will state later the type of design that you're going to use, then you can mention that it is a longitudinal research design, particularly time series design or panel design. So this is also used when you want to come up with a model that will show. So usually it is also for the problems that involves, like, let's say, you want to come up with an equation or a model that describe the influence of a certain variables like time to your main variable. So we have what we call as time series design. So it measures same variable at a regular interval, or if you want to also do some analysis at individual level, then it's a panel design. So you can have, of course, more information about all of this. So you can search about all of this type of research designs and try to figure out if you think your study is classified under this design. So as mentioned in our introduction, so this is just an overview or a background of what is expected in each of the section. Okay, so how about qualitative design? So we also have different types of qualitative designs. We have the ethnography. So these are the studies that involves cultures, phenomenology. It's about individual experiences, grounded theory. So if you wanted to work on key social, psychological, and structural processes, you want to come up with as mentioned, structural processes. And also participatory action research. So these are the researches that aims improvement. And of course, it is a participatory action research because the researcher is involved in the study. So just like, for example, in action researches inside the classroom. So the teacher acts as a teacher, as of course, the teacher, and at the same time, he or she is also the researcher. So he or she implements the intervention. And then for case study, so it is an in-depth study of a single or a small number. So if you want to have an in-depth qualitative study about one particular individual, two particular individuals, or at this at most 5 individuals, so it's a case study. So these are the different qualitative designs. So we have the ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, participatory action research, and case study. Okay, let's move to the next section. So the next section is the research locale. So where will you conduct the study? So where the study, of course, will be conducted. You have to give description of the locale. So as much as possible, do not place too many informations about the research locale or any other informations about the study. So just focused on where will be the study, where will be it conducted. So the study will be conducted at, so you have to just name the locale and just give the description of that research environment. So you have to give characteristic of the locale, and it is bestly described if you will focus on the reason why you chose that particular environment. So you can name characteristic of locale, why it is the best locale for the study. So for the research participants, so this is another section of the research methodology. So who will be the participants? So it can be termed as the respondents of the study if your study is quantitative, because the data that will be gathered is using, for example, a survey questionnaire. So they serve as respondents because they will respond to the questionnaire. So they are called respondents of the study. While for subjects, usually we use subjects of the study if the study is experimental. So they do not serve as simply responding, but they are the one who is being observed. So they are the subjects of the study. While for participants, usually this is the term used for qualitative researches. So we call it as qualitative, we call it as participants of the study. And just in case it is your study is a mixed method design, or it will use a mixed method design, we actually have here the general term, which is participants of the study. So the respondents and the subjects, or rather the participants, will serve as a respondent, and they will also serve as the subject of the study. You can also discuss under research participants the number of sample size and or your population. So you can also discuss there your the sampling techniques that you used. And you also can give description of the respondents, maybe in terms of demographic profiles and others. So some of the researchers placed an item to describe the profile of the respondents, but actually the best location where you can place that part is under research participants. That's why we have a separate section for that. So if you want to give more information about your respondents, you can place it under research participants. So you can describe them in terms of their age, their sex, the civil status, and all other essential characteristics that you think can help in your study. Okay, let's move to the next section of the paper or research methodology. Another is research instruments. So how will you gather your data? So you will gather your data using research instruments. So what will be the instrument of your study? So you can name your questionnaire. So you have, of course, to cite the reference of your questionnaire just in case you adopted it or you modified it. So you have to name the source of your questionnaire. Is it a researcher-made questionnaire? So just in case it is a researcher-made questionnaire, or even if it is adopted and you modify something in the questionnaire, or it is patterned from several references, so you have to also establish the validity and reliability of your instrument. So usually this is done by conducting a pilot study. So you also need to mention that in this part. So what is the validity index and the reliability index? So for validity, just in case also you asked some experts to validate it, so it is also very important to mention the characteristics maybe of your validators or evaluators in general. So what did you use? What will you use? Are you going to use questionnaire, interview guide, or documents? So it can be syllabus or lesson outline or records. So you have to name all the research instruments here. So also the consent form can be placed here as part of your instrument. So you have to describe the parts of the instruments, what it measures, and establish the validity and reliability. So just in case you think it is not classified as research instrument, so you can term it as the sources of the data. So just in case it's a combination of some sources of the data or a questionnaire, an interview guide, and all other instruments that will be used in your study, aside from using the term research instrument, as mentioned, you can use it as sources of the data. For data gathering procedure, so this is now narrating. So it's narrating how will you gather your data. So you can start with as soon as it was approved. So what will be the next step? So are you going to finalize first your data, subject it to validity and reliability test, asking permission to, of course, the administrators or officers in charge before the conduct of the study, floating the consent form for your respondents. So of course, you have to mention the ethical considerations also gathering your data. So did you ask permission? Did you did you ask the respondents to fill up the consent form and all other stuff? And of course, do not fail also to mention the validity and reliability test if you also conducted that part before floating it to your actual respondents. So you have to also narrate how did you administer the test or how did you float the questionnaire. So right now, you can actually do this. It can be that you float your questionnaire using just Google Forms, or did you administer it personally? Okay, so you can present this using flowchart. So you can just come up maybe with some sentences that can summarize the procedures, and then after that, you can just give also a brief background of each of the procedures that you place in the flow chart. Or if not, you can just focus on placing it using, of course, the sequence, like what did you do first, second, until to the last part. So usually we end with the data was the data gathered were analyzed and interpreted. So that's actually the last part of the data gathering procedure. So usually it is stated that it is analyzed and interpreted. And how did you interpret? How did you analyze it? So you have here the next section, the treatment of the data. So for the treatment of the data, so you have to state how will you answer the research problem. So it is best to present this based on also on the arrangement of your research problem. So if you have descriptive problems, then for the treatment of the data, so you have to name what descriptive statistics will you use. For inferential problems, what inferential statistics is appropriate for your data. Or if you have some problems that is answerable using qualitative analysis, then you also need to discuss that in the treatment of the data. So the treatment of the data is not limited to the statistical test only. So you also need, of course, to mention all the necessary or all the treatment that you use to answer each of the problems in your research questions. Okay, so here are the list of common statistical tools, just in case you have descriptive problem, the usual, especially if you have sufficiently large enough samples. So the common is mean and standard deviation. Also, you can present a summary using frequency count and percent distribution. And of course, you also need to present the table for interpretation, and you have to go back, how did you analyze your data using your questionnaire. So for inferential problems, so if you have problems on comparison of two groups, so possible is to mention in your treatment of the data that you're going to use t-test for independent samples or Mann-Whitney U test. So in the proposal paper, so you can mention both, especially if you do not have yet the data. But if you have the data, so you can already assess which of these two tests is applicable in your study. So for comparison of the three groups or more, you can use one-way ANOVA or its counterpart, Kruskal-Wallis. And for samples of comparison, we have the Bonferroni-Shaffer test, comparison of two dependent groups, t-test for dependent samples, paired samples, Wilcoxon signed rank test. And also, if we extend this comparison of three or more, we also have the repeated measures and the Friedman test. For relationship, we have chi-square test, Pearson-R and Spearman-Rowe. And for factors, we can also use regression analysis. And then for qualitative, so you can actually do and mention in the treatment that you're going to use content analysis. So that is identifying the main things, or we term it as thematic analysis and coding. Okay, so this is all for this video. Thank you for watching.